As companies prepare for employees to return to the workplace, businesses are considering different ways of monitoring employees for possible COVID-19 infections. And a new survey by Gartner, that's an IT service management company, found more than half of the employers in the country are making plans to collect temperature data on employees. Erica Pandey is a reporter at Axios, and she reported on how companies are weighing the use of surveillance on employees in the name of safety, and she joins us now. Erica, so good to have you. How are companies choosing to surveil employees, and are the methods ethical?
So the big picture here is just that the coronavirus pandemic has really normalized the collection of biometric data in a way that we haven't seen before. And like you said, it goes anything from something as simple as temperature checks, which a majority of employers are planning to do, to something as detailed as infrared cameras that do real-time heat maps of an entire workspace and track people for for fevers. And the ethics of this is all up in the air. I mean, the first thing to know is that there is no regulation or standard on how these data are collected or stored or used by companies. And if you'll remember, before all of this, the big debate was, are Amazon and Facebook and Google collecting too much data on their consumers? And this was starting to get a lot of attention from the public and from government. But the pandemic has completely washed out that conversation. And even though these measures will promote safety and we should think about them, the ethics are just not being discussed at all.
Yeah, when I read your article, I was sort of torn because I thought, this is your health information. Maybe it's just your temperature. Maybe they're asking you, did you go to a high COVID state over the weekend? And that's your private business, and so you shouldn't have to share it. But this is the sort of stuff that's going to keep us safe in our work environment. Then again, I thought, don't HIPAA laws sort of protect you from sharing that information, keep that information sacred? I just sort of wondered, where could this go?
I mean, a lot of these are employers requesting this information. There might be an optional clause, but if you want to come back to work, we need to know who you live with and what you're doing on the weekends and all that kind of stuff, like you said. But this is a time where so many people feel lucky to just have a job, and they'll do what they can to comply and keep that job. And that kind of pressure, economic pressure on workers, may clear a lane for employers to keep collecting more and more information.
And Vlad, the thing about this sort of information is that usually these are the questions that are asked, when you go to the doctor. When you have an appointment now, they ask you, where have you been? And they check your temperature before you can even get in. But they're required by law to protect that information once they gather it. What about your employer? What are they doing with that data?
Right. There is a great deal of regulation, like you said, what goes on between you and your doctor, but there's none of that exists with the employer. I mean, the worst case scenario, employers could potentially sell this data to insurers who could, get a better picture of your health and your medical history. And there are ways to protect this, but that requires laws, like you said, and regulation and debate, and we're not seeing that. An interesting thing to think about is also vaccinations. We've seen healthcare workers and educators be required to show vaccination history for things like the measles because they're around kids or sick people. Given COVID-19's, impact on the country and the disastrous impacts it has, you could see employers in every industry start to require those vaccinations. And, the short answer is yes, they can require that, but there are people who feel nervous because of the speed at which these vaccines are being developed, and that feel sort of, uncomfortable. But people will need a lot better reason than just kind of feeling generally uncomfortable to say no to these vaccinations. So there's, a lot of conversations that need to happen both between workers and their bosses and between, and within government around these issues that we're just not having.
It's an interesting question, Erica, because, it's, I guess, one thing for people who choose not to the idea that there would be a vaccine, for example, for the coronavirus, and that a place of business would require their employees to be vaccinated to protect other workers in that place of business is an interesting one. And so, is there a way that employers could make it a requirement before you return to work if there is a vaccine?
Yes, the short answer, if you talk to both HR experts and legal experts, is that employers can make this requirement, and then employees. Certain states have laws that say for religious or philosophical or other compelling reasons, you can say no. But if you think about from the employer perspective, they're trying to protect entire workforces and entire workspaces. So their hands are tied too. And one worrying thing unrelated to all of this is just how much kind of panic there's been around a vaccine. And you see polls with lots of people saying they wouldn't take a vaccine in any case. So there just needs to be a lot more education on this topic, both from the medical side and from the reopening and work side.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. I think, so much of us would be so relieved to get to the other side of this pandemic that I think we're willing to give up a lot in the name of health. But, they're not, those companies are not just protecting other employees, they're protecting the business as well. They're protecting their bottom line, and that's going to be part of their motivation. And to that end, your article also touches on sort of other surveillance techniques, I guess, that are being used. We talked about this before here on CBSN when it comes to remote working, keeping tabs on employees, new techniques, new technology, and in the same way, people are probably kind of happy to be working from home, and so they may be willing to give up some of their privacy as a result. Can you talk a little about that?
Absolutely. I mean, this is, in my opinion, the most sinister of what we've seen is the kind of work from home surveillance. And the concern comes from, we had to kind of overnight, all these companies had to send their entire workforces home, and they became nervous, is this going to affect productivity? Are people going to be working from home or kind of, slacking from home? And then you've seen companies do pretty drastic measures like ask people to turn on their webcams while they work, install software that tracks their keystrokes and what web pages they're visiting. It all feels very Big Brother to me. I mean, it's one thing to check temperatures and clean offices and make sure that the public spaces at work are safe. It's another to let your boss into your house and into your kitchen and bedroom and watch you as you work. And I mean, that I think is a lot of a lack of understanding in corporate America that working from home and working remotely can be productive. And hopefully this sort of grand experiment where everyone has been working from home and a lot of companies have been chugging along business as usual will be kind of proof to employers that they can, let go of the reins a little bit and let people be adults.
Yeah, really great points. A really good article. People should check it out in Axios. Erica Pandey, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.